And why don't we get started? Just a little info about the recording. I'm looking in the chat. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for introducing yourselves. So today's webinar is focusing on providing on-site supports, really looking at best practices in job coaching. Providing on-site supports, such as job coaching, may be necessary for some job seekers to be successful on the job. However, we want to make sure we're not providing on-site supports and the person doesn't want that. So we want to really make sure that we're assessing the need for on-site supports. The employment specialists over the years, in my experience, have expressed some concern about how to provide these supports while respecting the individual, not being intrusive to the work environment. So today we're going to talk about some tips and resources about how to best do that. So specifically, we're going to look at what on-site supports are in job coaching. We're also going to assess the need for on-site supports and apply best practice strategies and solutions to facilitate on-site supports. So I'm just looking in the chat. Good morning, Erica, everyone. So Dawn or Darren, if you're on the line, please jump in and say hello, and any kind of housekeeping that might need to be sent out. I'll wait a minute or two to see if anyone is there. Okay. So my screen, oops, kind of messed up a hair. So I wanted to just kind of get us started thinking about what are supports, and looking at this question in one word: what is the most important support you have received for work? So you can use your phone to grab the QR code, or you can join at slido.com, or you can just put it in the chat and I'll add it in. So whatever works best. So in one word, what's one support that's been most important to you in work? You know, one or two words. Collaboration. Specific training by a specialist, another helpful coworker. So having some specific training by a specialist, having a helpful coworker have all been helpful. Let's see in the chat. We have communication, we have feedback. Hey, Dawn, how are you? So feedback, communication, clear objectives. Support. Transparency. So lots of important and critical components to supports you've received on the work site. So when we think about employment supports, we're really looking at those. If we could just make sure we're muting, that would be great. So when we think about employment supports, we're really looking at people or resources that help someone to be successful on the job. It's really important for the job seeker to understand what their support needs are and who's available to assist. Those supports can be in the community, on the job. We're going to talk today about natural supports and how to help someone develop and use natural supports in the workplace. When we think about employment supports, we really want to encourage you to think about what types of discussions you're having with someone and how to assess the need for supports. Supports may come from friends or family, peers, other professionals, and it's up to the job coach to identify how much involvement they would like to have these individuals in their employment support process. So we're really wanting to make sure we are respecting the job seeker's wishes. We're not disclosing information that the person doesn't want disclosed regarding their support needs. We're really having these detailed conversations with someone about what it is that they would want in terms of employment supports, particularly as we talk about on-site supports. And we have to remember that employment supports can change over time and evolve over time. Someone may require quite a bit of support in the beginning of the job in order to learn the new job tasks and assimilate into the work environment. However, this intensity may change over time, and it's important for employment specialists and other natural supports on the job to really tailor supports based on the current support needs. So as you'll see in today's presentation, we're going to talk about ongoing assessment and how to really make sure we're assessing at various points of the job seeking and job acquisition process. Again, really essential to continually examine and adjust those supports when assisting someone in keeping employment. It really is recommended that support needs are assessed at the start of the job, really looking at maybe after the first week or in the very beginning, and then at certain time points thereafter, maybe every 3 months, maybe every month, depending on what the support needs are. This will help ensure that the job seeker support needs are continuing to be met and that any need for a new support is being identified and can be adjusted and you can help that person access whatever that new support might be. As I mentioned, natural supports are an area that we're going to focus on today. We really want to help individuals identify natural supports. In the chat, if you can kind of describe or raise your hand, unmute your mic, what a natural support is. So when we talk about natural supports on the work site, what are we really describing? We'll wait a minute. Here we go. Okay. So coworker support, absolutely. So your coworkers are natural support. Your supervisor, maybe there are built-in trainers on the job who are available for all employees to receive additional training or initial training. So those supports that are natural to the workplace. And we're really focusing today's webinar on on-site supports. And of course, natural supports can be off-site as well. It could be people in the community that the person is involved with. It can be family, it can be friends, and so on. So why don't we move on to some principles of support. So these three are here, and we really want to pay attention to supports that are customized. So not just generic supports that are provided to every person receiving employment services, supports that are unique to the person and address those unique needs of the individual. Supports are also changing, right? So they need to be flexible. So someone may receive a promotion, supports might need to be adjusted to fit into those particular new job roles. Support needs are ongoing and must be time unlimited. So if someone gets a job, the job duties change, support needs might also change and may need to continue to be adjusted based on the new job tasks. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, varying levels of intensity. So not everyone may need that intensive of support. So someone may need some very intensive supports in the beginning. Other people may need intensive supports when they're going up for a promotion or asking for different job duties. So having that flexibility and making sure that the intensity level matches what the person's needs are. So when we think about on-site supports, we want to move into how to assess the need for on-site supports. But before we move into kind of those assessments and what is typically done to kind of get a sense of what types of supports are needed, I'd like us to talk about what are the ways that you have assessed the need for on-site supports for people that you've worked with. What are some ways you can use the chat or unmute your mics? What are ways that you've assessed someone's need for on-site supports? What are some of the tools? What are some of the resources? Other ways that you've assessed that need? You can always unmute your mics as well. Lance is mentioning on-site visits to watch the employee in action. So I think that's a great point you're bringing up, Lance. So going in person, observing in the environment, also brings up some other questions. How do we do that in the least intrusive manner? How do we go on site and observe individuals performing their job duties in a way that doesn't intrude on their own interactions with coworkers or their supervisor, or are respectful of the person's confidentiality? What are, and we're going to get into that, so hold that thought. But yes, I like the idea of seeing the person in action, interviewing skills. So yes, so having good communication skills, talking with someone about past jobs, ask the person what their needs are. So talking with the individual, what are their needs? If they are able to reflect on past jobs, past experiences, that may help identify what some of the current needs might be. Adi is mentioning discussions with the employee, the employer, and counselor. So maybe bringing everyone in and having that discussion, touching base with a hiring manager to ask how the new hire is fitting in. So having some ongoing communication with the employer is a way to continuously assess support needs. Asking them if they have identified any specific areas needing additional support. So yes, having that discussion, having those ongoing conversations with individuals about what some of those barriers or obstacles in the past may have been, what are some solutions they may have tried in the past, and how those solutions might be applied in the new position. So you brought up interviewing skills, talking with the person, getting that information through conversations. We have to touch on listening skills because we want to hear what the person is telling us. We want to be able to reflect back. There are also some other important reasons why we want to use good listening skills when we're assessing support needs. Why are good listening skills important in this particular aspect of your job? You can use the chat or unmute your mic. So when we're assessing support needs or really any kind of assessment, but for this particular webinar, we're focusing on supports. Why are good listening skills important? We know that relationships are based on trust. Let's see, we have for safety reasons. Lance mentions, maybe Lance, if you can unmute and we can have a discussion and kind of further elaborate what you mean by that, just to clarify a bit.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yep, yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Like if they're in a warehouse setting or if they're using tools or anything, if they're not listening well, they're not getting the full instructions and they're not going to be able to stay as safe as they need to be or keep others as safe as they need to be.
Absolutely. So good listening skills are important for the job seeker and the employee, but they're also good and important for us as employment specialists to really get a good sense of what is needed. Like you're mentioning, Lance, there are some safety concerns in certain jobs. So really listening and hearing what the person's past obstacles might have been or past difficulties in certain positions allows us to be able to match different support needs to what might be most beneficial for that person. Cindy writes, getting to know the person's strengths, absolutely. So we want to hear what the person's strengths are, because many of the support needs can be tailored to what the person's strengths are, or maybe there are strengths that the person can expand, or we can help the person utilize in the job to help minimize some of those support needs. Adi mentions to accurately understand the need so you're able to find the best solution. Yes, so when we're listening, just like Lance and Adi and Cindy mentioned, when we're listening to the person and we're hearing what they're telling us, they're opening up, they're developing that trust, we're reflecting back. We really want to make sure we're getting an accurate and effective assessment, and reminding ourselves to practice our listening skills, to practice those oars. If you think about motivational interviewing, right? Open-ended questions, affirmations, reflecting back to the person what they're telling us and summarizing. Just in general, using those communication skills helps us to get accurate information so that we can help develop a support plan that really accurately reflects what those needs are. Peggy's mentioning this is important when you have a young candidate that doesn't really know what they want to do. Yes, so really reflecting back different experiences the candidate may have had in their lives, maybe unrelated to work, maybe more education or volunteer or clubs or other activities, but listening to find out potential support needs based on those experiences. So when we are assessing support needs, it really begins way before job placement, right? We're meeting with someone, we're developing along with the person a career profile that outlines what the person's interests are, what their work values might be, what their past barriers and past successes, right? So we're really looking at what some of those experiences may have taught the person about what their potential support needs are. Different assessment tools, we might look at maybe different types of assessments, like Lance had mentioned, observing the person on the job. Maybe prior to the person getting employment, maybe we're observing what goes on at that job. Maybe we're getting a sense by doing some observations and talking with coworkers or supervisors at that potential job site, getting an idea of what the job requires, almost like a job analysis or work site analysis, better understanding what that job requires, and not just the tasks, right? But also the work culture. What's the work culture like? What are those kind of more soft skills that might be needed? Or what's the personality of that organization, right? So is it very formal? Is the work culture informal? Do people dress formally, informally? Do people discuss personal relationships, or things kept just very much work related? So really understanding the hierarchy and other work culture factors when you are helping someone to assess support needs, looking at both the work site in terms of the job analysis, what's required in the job, and you can do that through observations. You can do that through discussions with employees at the work site, supervisors at the work site if they allow you. Are there other ways that you can assess on the job site in addition to observing, like Lance had mentioned, and of course talking with the job seeker about their past experiences? But what about other assessments that can be done in the work area, on the work site? We'll just leave it a minute or so, or a couple seconds for people to respond. When we're talking about past experiences, we want to discuss past jobs, past education experiences, past clubs, any other types of hobbies the person may have been involved with, specifically addressing what went well with those jobs, kind of making it more open-ended. What did you like about the job? What went well? What were some areas that you had some difficulties with? What did you not like about the job? That could give us some clues about what those potential support needs might be. What helped in the past? What made you feel connected to the job site? What made you feel able to communicate effectively with your coworkers? So really asking those types of questions in an open-ended way, and then reflecting back to the person, because you want to make sure you got it right. Reflect back what the person is telling you, whether it's just the content of the message, what they're actually saying, so that you can just check in and make sure you're getting it, or reflecting back feelings. You felt uncomfortable, you felt fearful, you felt anxious, whatever those feelings are that the person might be telling you, you're reflecting back to them so that you're getting a real good assessment about what it is those past jobs the person liked or didn't like. So we're also talking about not just pre-employment, right? So we're wanting to make sure that a good job match occurs. When a good job match happens, there may be minimal or not as many support needs, right? So what would be a good job match? What kinds of factors do we want to look for when we're considering the job match? You can use the chat or unmute your mics. Erica mentions talent and skills matching the job description. So making sure the person's skills and talents, also their values, right? Also their interests, their preferences, in addition to their skills and strengths, matching the job description, all of those other areas that are important, those work-related values, past job experiences. But that requires us to also, in addition to looking at what the employer's needs are, making sure that we're paying very close attention to what the job seekers' goals, values, and interests are. And then ongoing. So we want to make sure the assessments are ongoing at different points in time. When might you reassess a support need? When might you, or when have you in the past reassessed a support that someone might need? Did someone unmute to let us know what was a support need or a time in the person's working career that you might need to reassess a support need? Certainly, we have a chat. Let's see. When Erica mentions, when I get repeat clients, we always reassess. So people who are coming in repeatedly, it might be a good idea to kind of get a real good sense of why that might be happening, really assess those support needs. Peggy writes, I would think prior to the probationary period. Yep. So prior to any sort of probationary period coming to an end, assessing what those support needs might be, so that you can get in there and help the person or encourage the person to use those natural supports on the job. Adi mentions a few months into the job. So, yep, maybe when the person first starts the job, and reassessing every couple of months or every few months, whether that's conversations with the person, or if you have the person's permission to speak with the employer, maybe that's touching base with the employer, like someone had mentioned earlier in the chat, following up with that employer, hiring manager, but certainly reassessing with the individual at least every few months. And certainly if anything on the job changes, promotion, new coworkers, with COVID, many jobs transition to remote. And if that was the case with individuals you worked with, those support needs might look very different than they did prior to working remotely. So just really making sure that we're assessing during those pivotal times when the person's support needs might change. Ongoing support plan development. This could be folded into your recovery plans that you have with individuals, the goal plans that you're already doing, but making sure that we're also creating plans with the person that assess and carve out what supports are needed. So it's not just the choosing employment and the getting employment, the looking at what the person's goal is and helping the person develop a goal, helping the person develop resumes and applications and role play interviews, but also planning for those supports and those ongoing supports. So after the person is on the job, you want to do kind of certainly when you want to do your support planning during the career profile. So when you're developing the career profile with someone, making sure that you're addressing those supports that are potentially needed based on previous experiences, but certainly after post-job placement, you want to assess the needs. You want to make sure that you are looking at work relationships. So asking specifically about the person's relationships on the job, because we know that those interpersonal skills and interpersonal relationships can really be critical to someone maintaining employment. In fact, some research when I was preparing for this suggests that individuals who have natural supports really do fare better in employment, have longer employment tenure. A lot of the research talks about how that support really is that component that helps the person remain employed, particularly natural support. So when we're thinking about support plan development, we're really wanting to make sure that we're bringing in those natural supports, like people mentioned in the chat earlier, coworkers, supervisors, others, even outside of the employment setting, could be friends or other community members that help the person with employment related needs, maybe transportation or having someone to vent to or whatever that might look like. But we also want to look at the job tasks. So when we're helping the person develop a support plan, we want to look at the relationships, we want to look at the tasks of the job, the physical environment. So, what's the environment like physically? Is it, is it a lot of walking, a lot of up and down, a lot of in and out, cold, hot, whatever that might look like could play into someone's plan development. We want to also look at the routines. Are there certain job routines, whether it's task routines or other more soft skills like interacting with coworkers during a lunch break or other kinds of routines going on breaks or team trainings or whatever that routine might be, but really helping to identify what that is and plan for that. So a plan should look like, and kind of can have a variety of ways that you can do this. I didn't want to provide a template because you may already have some templates that you're using, but you want to help the person identify what the potential barriers might be, what solutions have worked in the past, what solutions may not have worked in the past, who is responsible for what. So identifying specifically what the person's role is, what they're responsible for, what you might be providing support around, what others might be providing support around, and then maybe follow-up dates so that you can really plan of when you're going to be following up on what those support needs might be. So like Adi mentioned, maybe it's every 3 months, maybe every 1 month. I guess that would depend on your organization and the person's needs. But really developing a support plan is really a nice way to keep those support needs in check and making sure that we're paying attention to what might be needed on site. So based on your experiences, what are some common support planning themes that you see? So what are some themes around support planning that you see in your work? What do you find yourself providing support around, or your colleagues and coworkers providing support around? Even though everything is individualized and based on the person's needs, there still may be common support planning themes that we know individuals might need support around. Not everyone, but kind of gives us some clue. Just based on our experiences, we know that people might need help with understanding Social Security and work incentives. So maybe that's something that, if someone doesn't mention that, maybe that's something we bring up to make sure that it's being addressed. Transportation is a common theme, disclosure or managing personal information in the work site. So that's certainly something to plan around. Someone might need support from you to discuss the pros and cons of disclosure, or what types of information that they would like shared with coworkers, or what they would like to share with their coworkers and supervisor. Support around work culture. So, like we mentioned, what are those features of a work culture that the person might need to pay attention to, or we as employment specialists would want to be mindful of to make sure that we're providing supports to address that, getting along with coworkers and supervisors, even how to dress at work. If someone hasn't worked for a number of years, not knowing how to dress, or what business casual means, or whatever the dress code is, that could be something. Managing symptoms and other treatment related supports, and then also accommodations and modifications. So some common themes. Peggy mentions safety in the community, transportation, keeping confidence and self-belief. Yes, I think that's, Ted mentions that. I think that's great. That's not on here, but I think that's a wonderful reminder of that kind of that hope and belief in themselves. How can we provide support around that? Erica, a lot of support we provide are helping people get over barriers such as stable housing, food insecurity, et cetera. So yes, those are great examples. So Ted, if you could unmute or type in the chat before we take our few minutes break, what are some of the strategies that you've used to help someone keep confidence and a belief in themselves? You can unmute or use the chat. Okay, Ted's mic's not working. Simple encouragement, pep talks, that sort of thing. Absolutely. So encouraging, building on strengths, recognizing the person's skills and what they're good at, what they have done in the past. Absolutely. Those pep talks, even just knowing that someone is believing in them, knowing that someone is hopeful and believes that they can succeed. Ted also is mentioning enlisting coworkers and supervisors to do the same. Yes, in a very genuine way, getting coworkers and supervisors to also provide encouragement and pep talks and other ways that are motivating in the work environment. So where can people find ongoing supports? the job coach or your role as employment specialist, like Ted had mentioned, can help connect people to coworkers and supervisors who are supportive. So maybe in your observations and in your discussions with either the employee or the supervisor and others on the job, maybe you find that one or two employees, coworkers who are supportive and who are going to be helpful and provide that any additional training that the person might need. Sometimes when we are looking at work culture, we see those more informal leaders kind of emerge, and that leader, that informal leader may be someone who can provide some valuable support. Team building, absolutely, Cindy. So doing some team building, some places have employee resource groups. Yep, so there might be employee resource groups, there might be other sort of EAP type of groups, but yes, there could be those. In the community, people might be connected with associations or other clubs or connections in the community that might offer support outside of the work site. So yes, there are certainly ways, but always be thinking about where can people find ongoing support? How can we help them, that person, connect to those naturally found supports in the workplace or in their lives that can support work? So just a kind of snapshot of what we just said. These folks should all fit into the picture, right? So family, friends, community, all of the people on the job, coworkers, counselor, therapist, and then of course, employment specialists and job coaches. But this is to kind of illustrate that as job coaches, we can be exploring with the person other supports outside of just professional or just us. There might be other professionals who can support them in other ways, but certainly those natural supports are ones that we want to be encouraging the person to use. And then supports at the job site can include learning job duties, and it is 9:15. So why don't we, before we get into the supports at the job site, why don't we take maybe a couple of minutes, maybe 3 minutes or so, 5 minutes, just a break to kind of break up the 90 minutes, and then we'll come back at 12:20. So we'll take 5 minutes and then we'll come on back. Dawn, does that sound like a plan? So here are some supports at the job site that you might be providing for individuals: help with learning job duties, the work culture we mentioned, getting along with others, transportation, symptom management, accessing accommodations and modifications. So I do have some information to provide on accommodations that we're just going to kind of leave as more resources. We've had some webinars in the past on accommodations and assessing the need for accommodations and changes to the job site. But before we move on from here, what are the types of supports? Are there others in addition to these listed? I think this covers most, and really looking at that fitting into the work culture is really something to be aware of. Human resource, yeah. So Erica mentions the role HR, so knowing who the human resource professional is and what they can provide, what types of supports, absolutely. So helping the person sort of navigate the HR and hiring process. Are there other supports that you have found yourself providing or have in the past provided that aren't really addressed here? Skills training with partners. Yep. So providing that skills training. One thing that in the past I've provided when I was providing employment services was, and it's kind of here, I guess, the learning your new job duties is support during the orientation and training period. So whether that support was physically attending with the person, that was what they wanted, and that was something that they were okay with. And it was a very small training session with just one or two other people, but helping to orient the person to the job, supporting, augmenting what the supervisor was providing. That's not really listed here. But let's move on. So I did want to just briefly, since we did talk about some of the on-site support that we can provide, or helping people to access accommodations, and just kind of very quickly, accommodations are really those modifications that help to eliminate any obstacles or barriers caused by the disability. You can formally request accommodations through the Americans with Disabilities Act or your state disability laws. Looks at essential functions and some accommodations that are based on need are considered reasonable accommodations. And I'm providing a few here. Again, we've had different workshops on reasonable accommodations, so I'm leaving this more as resource material and some websites that you can further explore, but these kind of explain what essential functions are, those tasks that are essential to the job. So this kind of gives some more information about that. This can give you some more information on the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Again, just giving this more as resources for you to have moving forward. I have a ton of ADA and job accommodation network resources in the resource list here in the back. Just kind of gives some brief overview of the ADA. These are all areas as employment specialists we want to be aware of. We want to know the laws protecting individuals. We want to know the laws around disclosure. We want to make sure that we are familiar with the requirements for reasonable accommodations. And these resources here will provide you with that information. And again, my email will be at the end, and certainly feel free to email me with any additional questions about this, but just wanted to make sure we had the information on here so that you can follow up with these resources. Again, these are just some ideas for accommodations for individuals with mental health conditions. So I'm just going to go quickly through these because, again, these are more for resource purposes. Job Accommodation Network, phenomenal resource, free, very responsive when you want to have even a live conversation with one of their experts around accommodations or how to request an accommodation. They have lots of resources and information to help guide that process. And again, here's that flood of information on how to request an accommodation. So let's look at some situations and solutions. And again, this is from a job accommodation compliance series fact sheet that's referenced in the back. But let's look at this first scenario. Due to a disability, and we're going to kind of brainstorm together, a solution. So here's the situation. Due to a disability, a teacher experiences some disorganization in her classroom because of the clutter that they've accumulated from many years of teaching. What would be some possible solutions, on-site solutions? So if we were to just think about on-site supports for this teacher who's experiencing some disorganization that's causing her to not complete tasks on time and causing her to have a lot of stress, what are some on-site supports that a job coach might be able to provide, or you might be able to provide as an employment specialist, or even a natural support of a coworker or a supervisor? We'll let you respond in the chat or unmute your mics. Give it another maybe 20 seconds or so for people to respond. Well, looky here, we have a response. Here's a possible solution. A job coach can help. Oh, okay, so I should have waited a couple more seconds. So Cindy's mentioning reaching out and offer to help. Absolutely. Dawn, an offer to a new teacher to help organize in exchange for supplies. I love it. I like a barter system offering. And, Dawn, that offer to a new teacher to help organize in exchange for supplies builds a bond, right? You're helping the teacher who is experiencing the disorganization that you're supporting or offering some support to. You're helping to connect that person to a natural support in the workplace. And there's this reciprocity, right? So that's a great idea, Dawn. The person's not just helping this teacher, but this teacher's offering something in exchange. So there's this kind of equality that's happening, this reciprocity. Adi mentions, if not needed, the clutter must go, find a way of reorganizing and labeling. Yep. So one of the solutions that the ADA accommodation series talks about is having a job coach. The job coach helped the teacher learn organization techniques, help separate and store items, dispose of previous work and projects from years prior. So the job coach actually went and helped the person on the job site, kind of in that environment, learn some organization techniques, whether that's color coding or whatever those techniques might look like, to separate and get rid of the items that weren't necessary. So that's just one example. Another situation is a maintenance person at a furniture factory has a cognitive disability. His primary essential function, remember we talked about that critical task, critical function of the job that needs to be required, is to sweep away lots of the sawdust that's always accumulating. He does that very well. However, once he's performed a complete sweep of the floor, he has difficulty determining when it needs to be done again. So he does that very well, but has a difficult time knowing when it needs to be done again. And this results in sawdust kind of accumulating and becoming a barrier to other workers' mobility. So his coworkers are having a hard time getting around because this accumulation of sawdust. What would be a solution? What would be a possible solution for the maintenance person? I just want to also mention, Taylor mentioned for the previous scenario, ask the teacher what would help her, or see if she's overwhelmed and needs someone to talk to. Yes, so not don't overlook something that could be maybe a symptom or a reaction to stress. And maybe having someone to talk to could help with that, whether that's someone, a professional or a friend, a peer, whatever that might be. But yes, I don't want to move on too quickly, but thank you, Taylor. So for the maintenance person here at the factory, has a hard time determining what needs to be done or when it needs to be done again, but very, very good job at doing it. What can be something on site employment specialists can provide in terms of supports to help, what's a solution to help remedy this situation? Use the chat. Okay. Adi mentions enlisting. Okay, we have quite a few. Enlisting coworker support, maybe taking turns to let them know when it's time to do another sweep. Yes, so enlisting coworker support, maybe helping the person find that one coworker or two coworkers who are kind of those informal leaders or people who you think naturally would be supportive, just seem supportive. And Ted mentions the job coach can work out with the person to work out how to assess when sweeping is needed using specific signs. A coworker or supervisor who works nearby can be asked to provide reminders or cues of when sweeping is needed. Yes, that's a great illustration of the job coach enlisting others, enlisting natural supports to eventually be able to rely on that natural support, offering some reminders or cues. Erica, help implement an alarm system of sorts or have a meeting with the other workers for support. Yes, so having an alarm sort of maybe typically every hour it needs to be swept, or just to be on the safe side, sweeping it maybe more frequently or whatever that might look like. But having an alarm to set that, I like that. Lance, create a timer so the person sweeps at certain times of the day. Sorry for the caps. Taylor, give him cues so that he knows what to look for. Yeah, so different cues to know what he looks for. And they've already come up with a solution. And let's see, very similar to what you all kind of mentioned. After monitoring the employee's work, so maybe the job coach or even supervisor kind of gets a sense of the employee's work, they can help him discriminate between a clean floor and one that's ready to be swept again. So maybe that discrimination might be, looking to see if the whole floor is covered, half the floor, whatever that might look like, but helping that person to discriminate between a clean and a dirty floor. And the job coach is able to fade out, like you're all mentioning, their direct involvement, but can certainly remain available to provide support to the employee or the employer as needed. So these you can find, these are just adapted from the job accommodation and compliance series. There's a whole worksheet on job coaches, which was really helpful to look at. When we talk about job coaching supports, we're really talking in this sense of on-site supports for the most part, and really looking at these areas to include task analysis. So looking at what's involved with each of the tasks, looking at natural support development, natural cues. We're going to go over each of these: compensatory strategies, prompting, self-management, fading, and long-term supports. And these are from a really great resource that's listed here from Ohio. It's certainly not Ohio specific, but provides some good information for job developers and job coaches in terms of workplace, worksite supports. And they also touch a little bit on remote coaching supports, which I think is really helpful during this time. And you can click on this resource and get that information. But first and foremost, we want to try to be the least intrusive that we can. So when I say least intrusive, what does that come to mind? Or maybe even the opposite. What would be an intrusive example of a job coach or an employment specialist on the job site? What would be what you may not want to do? Spend another half a minute or so for people to write in the chat, or a minute. So when we're thinking about here we go. Okay. Lance wouldn't want to do the tasks for them. Yep. So want to make sure that you're not doing the work, that you're making it very clear that you are there to assist. You don't want to work off of assumptions. So you don't want to assume that the person isn't able to do the tasks. That's why it's even more important to do a very effective and thorough support need assessment to see what types of supports are needed on the job. Have people in the past ran into situations where they may have felt uncomfortable being on the job site and not knowing where to stand, how to talk to coworkers, or not your coworkers, how to talk to other employees on the work site, what to say, how to make sure you are, as Lance mentioned, not the one that they see in that job role, but to make sure that they're seeing the individual, the new employee that you're supporting in the job role. Has anyone ever run up against any difficulties or concerns, or even kind of feeling a little nervous about what to do? And maybe what have you? Yes, in a small restaurant kitchen, it was tight quarters. I felt in the way of traffic flow, observing a dishwasher. Yes, I've been in a similar situation. It was at an assistive care environment in the kitchen, and really trying to really get out of the way and not be not be an actual liability, not necessarily in the sense of a legal liability, but just you don't want the employees and the supervisor's impression of the new employee, the person you're supporting, to be defined by maybe you getting in the way. You don't want to have any sort of black mark or area that makes the person look bad. So Lance, what did you do in that situation? Cindy's writing, in the past, I overheard my manager talking to a coworker about me when I was only on the job for 3 weeks at a tense job. So yep, you want to make sure that you're not speaking of the employee that you're supporting in a way that's disrespectful, of course, or even disclosing information that the person did not want you to disclose. So making sure you're having that discussion. I found a corner to sit in out of the way, but could still see the employee working. Yeah. So sometimes it is that it's finding a spot that's out of the way enough where you can still observe and offer support, but in a very kind of in the shadows type of way. Some instructional strategies, and this resource listed below highlights many of those in even more detail, but first, like we mentioned, kind of learning about what the tasks are. So have better understanding through maybe a task analysis, what all the duties are, what the job tasks are, what the person needs to perform, and maybe you do that before you even go with the person. Maybe you do that on your own, or maybe you get the employer to provide you with the job listing or the job information about the job posting, the job requirements. Try to maybe enlist the support of the supervisor as much as you can to sort of get a better sense of what's needed on the job. Those natural supports, I think we talked about those extensively, getting coworkers to help to either observe, monitor performance. Maybe there's already kind of a mentoring program that takes place and encouraging the new employee to take advantage of those mentoring sponsored and company sponsored trainings. Natural cues are kind of what Erica had mentioned a little bit earlier. Maybe there are features or other things that are already in the work environment that can signal to the employee what to do next. So there might be loudspeakers or other types of alarms or other indicators or anything that already sort of naturally occurs to help the person hear that it might be time to move on to a new task, or might be time to take a break, or whatever that cue is prompting them to do. Compensatory strategies are really looking at helping to adjust the work environment, or it might be a change with the employee's behavior to enhance their ability really to perform those job tasks by themselves. So everything that we're promoting and discussing is really to ultimately lead to the person being able to do their job tasks independent of you, and hopefully at some point striving to do it independent of the natural supports, although none of us are work so independently that we don't need our natural supports. I would be very lost if I didn't have a couple of the coworkers that I call on very frequently to follow up with, just looking at different things that I've done, just to kind of check in and have that natural person to provide support. Compensatory strategies might include different apps that someone might be using on their phones, maybe reminders, like Erica had mentioned, to move on to another task, or a reminder to check the floor every half an hour to make sure it's clean, whatever that might be. When we also want to move into fading and making sure that we're gradually fading, right? Our support is gradually reducing so that the employee becomes more independent and able to perform the job duties with minimal support or support outside of the work site, right? So maybe you and the employee, the employment specialist and employee, are able to fade out of the job site and have more discussions in the office, on the phone, texting, whatever that might be. So making sure that we're we're fading and developing a plan to fade our intensive on-site services, if possible, or on-site supports. And then the long-term supports. So we talked about that, helping to develop that long-term support plan, right? So what happens when job duties change? Is there a natural person on the job that the employee can access for supports? Or is the job coach going to go back in and provide some as needed training to learn whatever new skills that might be, or whatever long-term supports might be needed? So helping to build that into a plan so that the person recognizes and knows that your supports will be available, whether that's you specifically providing the supports or you helping the person create those relationships and bring in those natural supports on the job. So the resource here is very comprehensive, very helpful for job coaches and job developers, provides a lot of additional information to what I just provided. I would suggest checking it out when you have a chance, but that's kind of the gist of it. And then kind of moving into the community, you know, this is mostly focusing on on-site supports, but we don't want to forget that there are also those supports in the community that we can help the person access or continue to access, continue to maintain existing friendships. That was one thing I remember. One person I was working with had a very strong connection with one of our wellness centers, and they went there pretty regularly, had a leadership role there. The job that they obtained was interfered with that. And I had not asked about that. And that was something that got in the way of this person continuing to work. And it did not come out until much later that they missed that time at the wellness center. They weren't able to find a new time to attend. The work schedule really interfered. Had that been something that we discussed early on, that may have worked out. I mean, it worked out in the end for this person, and kind of used that as an experience to reflect on and identify what they wanted in a new position, but family and friends and making new friends and so on. So let's look at what we learned and look at these 3 scenarios and talk about what types of supports would be useful. So this person, Chris, I just made up names. Chris works at a very slow pace, and it impacts their ability to complete job tasks within their shift. So they're not able to complete those tasks within their required shift hours. What are some possible supports, specifically on-site supports? What are some supports that could be helpful? Okay. Managerial or coworker support, absolutely. So the manager or coworkers can provide some support. What about a job coach working with the person on site? What types of on-site supports could a job coach possibly assist with? List a schedule of shift duties. Yep. So list the different schedule of what duties are required in that shift, and use some time management like Erica's mentioning, to make sure that they're completing those shifts duties. Maybe some sort of kind of whether it's an alarm type prompt or another type of prompt to help the person move on when necessary, breaking down tasks into steps to improve efficiency, which might offset a slower pace at work. Yep, so helping the person break down what those tasks are into smaller tasks, absolutely. Lance is mentioning guidance for each step. Guidance for each step of task completion, creating muscle memory. Yes, so providing that guidance, getting that muscle memory. Identifying what is the barrier, what's the cause of the slower pace, breaking down the tasks into more manageable, smaller tasks. Yes, so great suggestions. Focused training. So all of these can be provided on site if necessary, in the environment where the person's going to be using them. And then eventually helping the person use these skills without you there, or with maybe those prompts or those cues getting being reminders from the actual coworkers and supervisor. Paolo has, let's move on to the next one. Paolo has difficulty concentrating and can't focus on one task at a time. What are some possible supports? What about specifically on-site supports? Possible supports to help with concentration. And then as we're kind of moving along, also thinking about this third one. Jane has problems remembering certain tasks. What are some possible supports for Jane, and how about specifically on-site? So in the chat, you want to respond to either Paolo, who has difficulty concentrating and focusing on one task. What are some possible supports? And then also we can be answering Jane having some difficulties remembering certain tasks. Lance, find out if there is something or someone in the environment that distracts the employee. Yes, so maybe that would be some observations in a very non-intrusive way, or even talking to the supervisor. Steve, again, a list of shift duties and what time frame they need to be completed. Erica, yep, checklist system. Always get permission if you're going to be working directly with coworkers of theirs, their coworkers or supervisor on site. Always make sure you're having that conversation to make sure the person is comfortable with you being there. And if not, make arrangements to provide offsite supports. But always get that person's permission and make sure they understand the extent to what you would be providing, and discussions with employees or supervisors. So I did also want to show a quick video before we move into our questions. It's a few minutes, but I think it's a good illustration of how you can talk to a, let me just go to how to introduce the idea of job coaching to an employer. So it's a very brief video. I'm gonna show it now.
Jackie.
Hi Jackie, I'm Tom. Nice to meet you.
Nice.
Can you all see this? Just give me a quick yes in the, not even in the chat, but just if you could just unmute.
Yes.
Okay.
Nice to meet you as well. I'm so glad you took a moment to talk with me today. As you know, I helped Anne kind of get started here, and I know she's starting her first day tomorrow. And I wanted to come by, introduce myself, and tell you a little bit about what I do so that I can support you guys in a smooth transition to employment for her.
Well, I really appreciate you coming by because I do have some questions.
Great.
This is our first foray into hiring someone with a disability. So how exactly do you fit into the big picture? You know, what is your role exactly?
That's a great question. So my role is not to be the trainer. My role is not to take the place of your staff. You're the experts on your business, not me. So what I'm here to do is really provide any additional support you might need to make sure that Anne transitions into being an awesome employee from day one. So that could be helping her with paperwork on the front end, helping her to learn the rules and norms of the office, introducing her to coworkers and supervisors to make sure she starts building those coworker relationships right from the beginning. And really just making sure that everything you guys are doing for her has, you know, any tweaks that it needs. So if she needs some accommodations on the job, I can help you with that. If she needs to have some of the trainings tweaked for her, like let's say that there's some reading material that is something she might need a little help with, I can absolutely provide that. And so my role is really to help you guys just get a good start with her.
So will we then be responsible for her training? I would kind of like to keep it that way.
So would I.
Okay, because we want her trained the
Yeah.
Acme Widget way, you know,
Absolutely.
just so all of our employees are trained in a consistent manner.
No, and that makes perfect sense. And that's why I like to let you take the lead. I like to let your staff, whoever's training normal new employees, would be training Anne as well. So this is just like any other new employee. The only difference is you have me there to provide some consultation and additional guidance and support if you need it. So really, as we kind of progress through this, once Anne gets her feet wet, I will be slowly but surely sort of taking steps back. As she gets to know coworkers and supervisors, the goal is that they become her go-to people, and I'm the second level, so to speak, so that if things happen that you guys need support with, I'm always here. In fact, I brought you my card today so that you can contact me.
Great, thank you.
So I'm always here to provide that support, but the key for me is really that she's an employee of yours. So she should be performing the way that you guys want. She should be interacting with coworkers just like anyone else on staff, and really over time building relationships so that if she has trouble or if she needs to ask questions, she's got somebody on staff.
So what were your thoughts? What did Jackie do that helped the employer see that she was there to provide support? What were some of the discussion points that Jackie touched on that you found were kind of useful in describing the role of a job coach to an employer? So, yep, Lance writes, I like how she said that that she's there to support the employer and the new hire transition. She's not there to replace the employer, but to support. Yep. So kind of laid it out right there on the line, made sure the employer is aware that she's not there to take over, but to allow him and his staff to lead. And then Erica, that she is there for both the employee and the employer. Yes. So she made it very clear. And again, you'd have to really talk with the job seeker and the new employee that you're supporting to make sure that they're comfortable with what you're describing and disclosing to the employer. Jackie did mention disability. That may not need to be mentioned, if you're approaching an employer, but again, that would be dependent on what the employee's response is, making sure that you're getting that response from the job seeker or the employee. And you can watch the rest of it. It's just a very, they just go on again. It's, it's useful and helpful, but most of it is what we saw. So didn't leave a lot of time for Q&A, as usual, kind of right up here at the 10 o'clock hour. So if you have questions, I would really encourage you, I'll stay on if you want to write them in the chat. Use the resources that are here in the support. Lots of references, resources, and so on. You'll have these, they'll get to you. My email is, I'll put it here in the chat, and it's up here on the screen if you want to give a call or an email, and we can chat by email or even over the phone if that works. But please use that, use the resource that you have if you have any additional questions. But thank you. And I hope everyone has a good day. Dawn, is there anything you wanted to